Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody that is hopefully for somebody. My name is Kyle Naranya, and on episode 114, I will be reviewing Agatha All Along, the spin-off series from the Wandavision TV series of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. As this is a full TV series review, there will only be a spoiler review. There will be no non-spoiler. But if you haven't had a chance to watch yet, that's okay. You can also hear me react to the latest listener mail and find out what I will be reviewing next week on the podcast. Let's get through Agatha All Along.
What witch in her right mind would join Agatha Harkness's coven?
Not looking for right-minded witches, as it happens.
I was not looking forward to this show. There has been a substantial amount of reactionary greenlighting that had happened from the Marvel Cinematic Universe after the days of the Disney Plus launch. There has been some course corrections since then. Substantial amount of projects such as Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings sequel have all been pushed to after the multiverse is done, which will likely conclude with Avengers Secret Wars, which is scheduled to come out in May of 2027. All right, with all that said, WandaVision introduced Agatha Harkness to the MCU fans back in 2021, and now she has her own series. Why? That's a great question. As I've said, this is going to be through spoilers only, and unfortunately, I'm of two minds with this show, which is a lot of the story elements we get in the back half are quite interesting, but similar to the way that specific plot points were hidden from viewers in The Acolyte, this show really does struggle with that same problem. My viewing experience for this was quite different than a lot of my viewing experiences for anything in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, specifically from the television section, which is that I watched the first 2.5 on the days that they had aired, and I found the first 3 episodes in particular to be absolutely dreadful. That came from a production value standpoint. There has been a lot of praise for the production value, which I find kind of comical, given the way that this show at least looked in the cinematic universe from a cinematic standpoint, using that word cinematic more than once, which is that it looked cheap. Obviously, this doesn't need to be a spectacle, but there is an effective use of budget, particularly with Disney Plus, where they seem to really struggle between something looking quite inexpensive and looking overly expensive and too much like special effects. Unfortunately, with the first 3 episodes in particular, I found myself certainly feeling that this paled in comparison to something like Werewolf by Night, which from one degree significantly leaned into the B-movie serialness of this. Agatha All Along continued this trend of an exploration of the supernatural elements of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, and I'd be really curious to be a fly on the wall in the writer's room and how these shows are produced. There's been a long list of articles talking about how Marvel Studios, not this Marvel Cinematic Universe, created their shows with the lack of showrunners and whatnot. And Jack Schaefer being involved in this, who worked on WandaVision as well as Black Widow, I found especially interesting given how, compared to WandaVision, this show seemed to struggle in areas that the other one didn't. And unfortunately, because of WandaVision, which people may look back at with rose-colored glasses, my reception of it now probably would be more critical than when it originally came out in 2021. But in watching well-executed television, an element that I absolutely loathe is whether coming up with interesting ideas near the end of your season and what considers Easter eggs and foreshadowing, the groundwork to which it is laid out in Agatha All Along made for an uninteresting show until 3 episodes that decided to pretty much lay the groundwork for what the story was from the very beginning. And because that is the case, I found myself feeling next to no investment in what was going on because, from a writing standpoint, they know what all of the reveals are going to be. And there is a significant difference between that and, say, mystery boxing, where you have no ideas. What I'm frustrated most by is what this show does do throughout its run, leading up to the penultimate episode being the second last. I found that story quite interesting, but to which the plot points, character reveals, and how these relationships develop and what is revealed to the audience, the order to which this happens makes the investment so difficult to feel interesting. I was so often bored by this show, and that's not to discredit any of the actors and the performances provided. Everyone does a really great job when they are given interesting things to do. You have actors like Patti LuPone in this show. Audrey Plaza, somebody I absolutely love. Deborah Jo Rupp from That 70s Show and obviously WandaVision. And then Catherine Hahn is an actress who has incredible range. And another interesting aspect for this show is that obviously Agatha is the lead. She is quite literally the titular character. And unfortunately, I quite frankly am drawing comparisons to something like Penguin, which is currently airing, which is an element of the Disney era of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, particularly with the treatment of villains, and attempting to redeem a character who has done awful things from a fictional standpoint is not something that typically holds up well at all. You can give villains realistic and relatable character motivation, and that's great. A good example of this is Black Panther. But having the understanding that that character is not redeemable, redemption is impossible because of the heinous acts they commit, and ultimately, as seems to be a law with fiction, if you kill people, ultimately you do die. Again, this is full spoilers, and that does happen for Agatha, but the attempt at her redemption because of the relationship, full spoilers, as I've said, she has with William Kaplan, Billy Maximoff, does not justify centuries of this woman's heinous acts. Obviously, I do not want to undercut the loss of a child to which she has in this show, but the way in which these things are hidden from us. Let's start off with the first one, which is Billy Maximoff being inside of Joe Locke immediately is not something they're telling us. He's teen. Why does he have this sigil? Isn't that an interesting mystery? No. Unfortunately, where this show could have actually excelled, in my opinion, and been way more interesting, is starting off with where we see Billy in, I believe it is episode 5, that is his major flashback. Darkest Hours. No, episode 6. Where he wakes up out of this coma, not knowing what's going on, and having to willingly have this relationship with the person he knows or may not remember, but an uneven relationship with Agatha Harkness. But instead, similar ironically to Captain America the Winter Soldier, but dissimilar in the way it presented it, which was in the marketing to that, they immediately told you Bucky was the Winter Soldier. They didn't hide it from you. Instead, what makes that film, in my opinion, the best Marvel Cinematic Universe film of all time still, is that what makes that relationship and that dynamic so interesting is the exploration of Bucky's character having been revived by Hydra and having been this soldier that is responsible for so many deaths around the world throughout time. And how is that friendship that he had with Steve Rogers put to the test? That should have been the focus of John Locke's character with Agatha Harkness. And they have this back and forth where reveals are revealed to the audience near the end of the show, but all of this information has been deliberately held back. And the first 3 to 4 episodes truly suffer from that fact because that's the twists. We have to have twists to get into the other episodes. It reminds me of a lot of what Eric Kripke talked about with cutting his teeth in network television, which is you needed compelling episodes piece to piece, as opposed to the way that streaming for the most part has worked out, where you either tell an 8-hour movie, but the failure to make each episode feel vital to the story really misses out on that. And the recruitment of all of the Coven witches, we get to see, oh, look, they met interestingly from the get-go, and they attempt to introduce all these breadcrumbs that were in that. But because the way they're shown to us, it's just one episode of all the reveals. It reminded me of watching a film, or a heist film in particular, where you would see how the plan is being put together, and then the plan goes awry, and it goes you watch the heist happen and think everything happened fine, only to learn that no, we actually had a secret plan and we did all these things without laying, in my opinion, substantial enough breadcrumbs for that reveal. We learn substantial amount about Billy Maximoff and how his relationship with Agatha is affected because of the fact that he has these abilities, magical, supernatural, and being able to put visions into people's minds and actually bend reality. Of course, him being the character of Wiccan. And I am not going to announce that I am an expert on Wiccan. I am not. My information and knowledge of him as a comic book level is not substantial whatsoever. And another instance is how he is like his mom, and how that's teased, and it's an interesting piece of information. But watching through the first 3 episodes and learning that the Witch's Road was this creation of Billy that prior did not exist, doesn't build to anything throughout the first 4. We are witnessing them go through these events, going through these trials, and this is unfortunately an element that I did not enjoy because of the gimmick of WandaVision being a bunch of different sitcom styles, themes throughout the decades, subgenres, I suppose, of sitcoms. And WandaVision, or not WandaVision, I'm doing it myself, Agatha All Along having the themes to the trials, by the end of it, felt redundant, specifically because we're getting this from one of the same creators. And unfortunately, it felt more like a crutch of, well, the trial itself's not overly interesting, but look at the aesthetic. They're all in fun, different costumes, which is fine. But given the fact that this gimmick, which I'm going to call it that, had been done already, I found it more distracting than anything else. Continuing the aftermath of Westview, which is where WandaVision did take place, I did enjoy, and I liked getting to see where William Kaplan had come from and the relationship, how him being Billy, not knowing who he was, affected the people around him. It would have been much more interesting if maybe that was the focus of the first couple episodes. The actual Witch's Road, which I find interesting, has been given praise allegedly on Wikipedia for its production value, really did feel small, and whether they were using the volume or not to extend the sets, I'm not necessarily sure. I did laugh out loud when at one point Aubrey Plaza's character actually cut one of the screens, really working on that bent reality feel, which was quite comical. And her relationship with Agatha, I'll get into a little bit. The other witches are fun enough. They each have a unique backstory and relationship. The one that's the most interesting is that of Lilia, played by Patti LuPone, who has an episode that ironically reminded me of the storytelling method of Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1, where we followed the Flash falling through time. And while there are instances of Lilia feeling almost out of it with what's going on from a character standpoint, the level to which the significance is revealed later on, I felt to be a pretty big ask for people to remember those small instances where she was kind of loopy and not paying attention to the conversation at hand. And we see throughout her life how she is constantly coming in and out because she is able to see the future. She can read tarot cards, and that becomes vital, specifically with how one of the trials is and where she meets her untimely demise. That episode is really compelling. I like nonlinear storytelling. It's probably one of the better episodes of the show to begin with. And we really get to see an understanding of what's going on from her point of view. And interesting enough and quite comical, getting to see Billy's as slash Williams as well in his perspective on what actually was going on with Agatha when she was still under the spell of Wanda from the end of Wandavision. 7, 8, and 9 of this show is really the meat of this story, particularly where we learn after everybody, or we get through the final challenges of the Witch's Road, and what is the potion's character's name? I don't want to get it wrong. Jen Kale, played by Sashir Zamata, and she ultimately does succeed. The final challenge or final trial of the Witch's Road is given her power back. We learned that it was Agatha who was selling spells and an unbinding spell to somebody, unintentionally or not. And of course, Agatha, this is what I find so funny about the show. The show is attempting a redemption arc with the character, but the more we learn about her, to me, it provides more evidence that she should not be redeemed whatsoever. And specifically where the character is left off at the end, we see throughout the show, and it's probably a better time to announce it now because I don't really have much to say about the first 3 episodes. The trial's enough for fun, getting to see what's going on. They're essentially escape rooms. Like, that's what they are. There's very little magic used, potentially potions to some degree, and an interesting way of showing the time that they do have, whether that be a sand dial, different lights in the ceiling, musical chords and whatnot. And the Witch's Road is a great song, the way that it's used to summon the Witch's Road, and the origins of that being actually it was a song that Agatha was created with her son Nicholas Scratch and his journey near the end, and I'll describe that when I get to that particular part of the show, where we see the Witch's Road come to a conclusion, Tommy being the thing that Billy wants to bring back. I found it really interesting that as we learn what Billy wants from the Witch's Road, that he's not making sure, or he's uncertain as to which one of them he is, which I especially find funny because at least from Tommy in WandaVision, he didn't strike me as somebody who had any magical abilities whatsoever. He was more so on the meta side of being a superhero or of being a mutant, as opposed to somebody who was a witch capable of magical abilities. But regardless, that's the case. An element that, quite frankly, I don't appreciate them bringing them back was that of Ralph Boner from WandaVision. More than anything, WandaVision, I think, biggest crime near the end of it was having these multiversal substantial events, having Ralph Boner, who was played by Evan Peters, who was a Quicksilver in the X-Men universe, bringing him back as like a conspiracy. I remember this, nobody else seemed to, in the flashbacks, was fun, but it was to me a reminder of just playing up incredible twists for the sake of, to get people talking about it on social media, which was kind of annoying. And in the final trial, Billy realizes he's Billy. All he wants from the Witch's Road is to bring Tommy back, believing his spirit is somewhat amongst the aether of what was left over from the Westview incident. Believing to have achieved that, he is released from the Witch's Road, as well as Agatha. And we come to a conflict with Death, who is played by, oh my goodness, Audrey Plaza. And that relationship that she had a romantic one with Agatha makes the most sense. Agatha loves horrible things, and of course you would fall in love with Death. And this is another element of not hiding things from us, where she had done something horrible to Nicholas, and all it appeared was that she begged for more time, and he was still going to die anyways, which from an evil standpoint really doesn't seem evil at all. It seems like something a parent would do, which is to beg for their child to live longer. and ultimately just dies later on when he's, I think maybe he's under 10, he's 6-ish. And eventually her life is owed. And this is where some of the messaging, and it might just be my misinterpretation, which is that she bet his life for hers, but it doesn't feel like that was the case at all. Regardless, ultimately, she sacrifices herself for Billy, who shows up in the full Wiccan attire. It's at this point, then, near the end of this episode, it being 8, that we learn that all of these elements that were in William Kaplan's room helped him build the Witch's Road. And it's not just a mental image that he's put into all of the people. He actually affected reality, creating this thing that Agatha had used as a con to increase her power, because the only way that Agatha could absorb any more magic was if people were trying to shoot her with their Power Ranger beams. And so she created the myth of the Witch's Road over time using the song, and it's tormented, twisting the song that she and her son had created. And at some point, Billy / William, while studying magic, learned about the Witch's Road, but ultimately did create it. And all of these teases that we get at the very end would have been so much more interesting if they were built throughout the show. I'm sure there's going to be people that are going to argue that they are built into it, but I really think it's minimal at best, unfortunately. And what would have been a way better ending is episode 8. I actually am kind of surprised that there was an episode 9 for this show. Episode 8 ends with the reveal that it was all Billy's creation, which is a great cliffhanger ending. And the episode 9, and this to me feels like, from a creative standpoint, they almost said, you can't kind of leave it there. This doesn't make any sense. And for all of this to be in episode 9, which is the story I just told you, we get to see Nicholas's life with Agatha. We learn about the creation of the Witch's Road song and how that affected everything, only for Agatha in the present to show up to be a ghost, and they're going to go on their search for Tommy. As in a finale, in my opinion, it really undercuts what was an interesting episode with episode 8. The construction of this show baffles me. That is not to say I didn't like the story as a whole. I actually did quite a bit. It's interesting to continue to explore the supernatural elements of the Marvel Cinematic Universe outside of Doctor Strange and WandaVision, and then I guess Moon Knight to some degree as well. It's been an aspect we've explored less. Obviously, we've done a lot of space and science fiction elements, but building out this world is interesting. The idea of where is Tommy, I'm going to be honest, I don't really care for that to be another TV show. I hope it's somehow tied into Vision Quest, which we know we are getting. I would be really curious if somebody could edit this all together. It's probably works out to being, I don't know, 4.5 hours, maybe 5 hours long. If you could cut this into a really compelling, like 3-hour movie, and it would likely be better because of that. I'm probably sounding more down on this than I think I am. Actually, more than anything, the way that this show was released frustrated me also. There is some story in here that I find really interesting, but Disney, more than any other streaming platform, on the Marvel side specifically, really does seem to suffer from construction of their TV shows. If they are written in the way that you would a network show, then okay, I guess to some degree that makes sense. Coming up with these ideas as you have them and them being put in later episodes, but these things being created in these chunks and essentially can be released whenever. This show was greenlit in October of 2021 and then came out now, September of 2024, ending on the day before Halloween. I really wish somebody had looked at all of this and then formed it into a cohesive show, because as much as I was critical of this, episodes 6, I would say, yeah, 6, 7, and 8, I really enjoyed. For them to be undercut by the finale, which I found kind of shocking. But overall, it was really great to have some more supernatural elements. The introduction of death, particularly in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is a really big deal. Audrey Plaza plays her really well. Death's impact on a lot of stories in the Marvel universe is quite substantial. What's she going to do when Secret Wars happens? I'm really curious to seeing if we get more of her. Audrey Plaza is obviously somebody who was working a lot, but absolutely chewed what Death was capable of from a scenery standpoint, as well as her delivery, and the cadence to which she plays Rio versus Death was quite interesting. Agatha as a ghost, I don't really need any of that at all. I I don't think I have anything else to say. Going through that probably was kind of a mishmash, and I apologize. But overall, the show is fine. And unfortunately, it kind of follows the path of a lot of other Marvel Cinematic Universe shows. It has been pointed to me that a lot of this show might be targeted specifically at an older generation, particularly women in their 40s might be really enjoying this show. And this is a friend of mine, so shout out Megan. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. And I have no issue with the cast for this show. It comes down to the writing and the structure more than anything. I thought a lot of the performances were good for what they were given, particularly from all of our leads in the Coven, but it felt a lot like homework getting through this. And unfortunately, that's not a good feeling for me. It's not something I want to have when I'm watching the next Marvel Star Wars big IP show. I want it to be entertaining, and some elements of this for me, for the reasons I've explained, weren't. So that will do it for my Agatha All Along review. If you'd like to let me know what you thought of the show, I'm on all the social medias. There is a link tree in the podcast episode description. So let's jump into question of the week responses and listener mail.
Can I ask you a question? Just fun?
There's something I've been meaning to ask you.
I ask the questions, you answer the questions.
Why do you ask questions to which you already know the answers?
Did that count as a question?
Yes.
Damn it.
Last week's question of the week was, who is your favorite Spider-Man villain? We have a first-time writer in. This is awesome. Thank you so much. From Rika, whose name is based in Hungarian. So that's really exciting and cool. Great name, by the way. I really liked this episode, referring to the Venom The Last Dance episode from the week prior, but can't wait for next week's about Agatha. I hoped you liked it anyways. Green Goblin is the scariest and most complex for me when it comes to villains. And then in here says, by the way, it's Rika as in Eureka. It's Hungarian. I super appreciate you giving me something to compare the name to so I can say it moving forward. So Rika, if you're listening to this, hello and thanks for coming back for another episode. Scotty Cameron writes in, my favorite Spider-Man villain would have to be Dr. Octopus because he's such an intelligent villain and a cunning mastermind. He rallied the Sinister Six to kill Spider-Man. He even took over Spider-Man. I find him such an interesting and compelling character, either as a villain in the form of Dr. Octopus or as an anti-hero superior Spider-Man. I also have love for villains like Hammerhead, Green Goblin, and Lizard. I'm shocked, Scotty, by this because I know you are a diehard comic book reader. You didn't say Doc Ock in that once. You said Dr. Octopus both times. Good for you. Dylan writes in, favorite Spider-Man villain? He has so many great ones. I'm just going to say ones that haven't been in movies yet, like that I'd like to see. Chameleon, Kraven, and Hobgoblin. Well, Kraven will be, but regardless, yes, he hasn't been in a movie with Spider-Man. And here we go. By the way, you're wrong, Kyle. 90s Spider-Man, the animated series, is the best. Just saying. So here's my question for you, Dylan. When was the last time you actually watched that show? Don't get me wrong. Growing up in the 90s, especially being a fan of the DC animated universe, absolutely adored the fact that we had a shared Marvel Spider-Man or Marvel universe, just like we did with the DC animated universe. In my opinion, why that show suffers more than anything is not because the 90s Spider-Man the animated series is bad. My reasoning for that is Spectacular Spider-Man is just better. That's the reasoning for that. If you watch it, it is the purest form of all those characters, and it belongs on Spider-Man Mount Rushmore. So, Dylan, watch Spectacular Spider-Man and the Spider-Man the Animated Series, and then get back to me, and I'd love to have a conversation about it. Awesome. Crazy Maniac writes in Otto Octavius, and we have an email here from Keen Machine. Greetings, Kyle. I must admit I'm not super well versed on my Spider-Man villains, but I have always thought Doc Ock was a keen original character with a fun design. There's a shocking amount of Doc Ock in here, but I'm not really surprised. You could argue him or Green Goblin are the best Spider-Man villains. I had a Spider-Man Game Boy game, but that was the only real experience with the character in addition to the early 2000s movies. It was really hard. I don't think I even bear it. I really enjoy learning more about the character in recent cinema. Spider-Man's subverse of the Marvel universe is definitely the most interesting to me. Okay. And then Keen has a question for me, which you can always send a question in. You don't have to answer the question if you don't have an opinion. And I love that some of the listeners have started doing this. Keen's question this week is, what's your favorite type of cheese? Oh, Keen, that is a really great question. I'm torn immediately between Brie and Monterey Jack for completely different reasons. Monterey Jack is something that I love melted on a panini, grilled cheese, or even in like a cold club sandwich. But Brie on its own, oh man, that's tough. I'm going to go with Monterey Jack right now, and I might regret that later. Keen, what's your favorite cheese? I'm really curious. And anybody listening, what is your favorite cheese? And then to round it out, it says, keep it keen. Stephanie writes in, I don't have an answer for this one, so I pose a question to you. BMK style, Tom Holland, Andrew Garfield, and Tobey Maguire. Okay, so we're doing that with the live action ones. This is not going to shock anybody who knows me at all, but this is incredibly easy for me. So, all right, here we go. I'm going to B, Tom Holland. I'm going to M, Andrew Garfield. And unfortunately, you know what that means. I'm going to have to K, Tobey Maguire. That's what it is. Again, thank you so much, Stephanie, for posing a question. Anybody who is a diehard Spider-Man fan, consider answering Stephanie's question this week in your comments on the social medias. All right, without further ado, this week's question of the week is... Oh, I don't even know. You know what? Actually, no, I do know what my question is, kind of where we've gone so far. Agatha All Along is a TV series that was based on a villain from a previous project. So from all of the Marvel Studios / Marvel Cinematic Universe characters, what villain would you like to see a TV show from? So that's the question. To answer it, you can comment directly on YouTube or Spotify, wherever the episode is posted, or you can email the podcast, filmrelistpod@gmail.com. The Film Relist is on all the social medias. I am on most of them. Not all of them are public. Some of them are private. And if you are a first-time listener and you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts specifically. I am trying to reach movie critic accreditation, which would allow for more opportunities for the podcast and move on to the next phase. So if you like the podcast and you haven't done that yet, please consider doing that specifically on Apple Podcasts. And if you really loved the episode, I'd also love a review. That would also be amazing. Actually, that reminds me, I got a bunch of reviews within the last week of the podcast, so let's start reading them. Sean writes in, love it, 5 stars, great podcast. This one's from J Ford, 2005. Great podcast, would highly recommend. So many amazing episodes, perfect podcast for movie enthusiasts, and then a bunch of movie emojis. And then Disco DDH writes in, knows a ton. Kyle is passionate about movies and talks about them to whoever will listen. He's great and always has fun insights and critiques. Thank you so much. KG178 writes in 5 stars. Love Kyle's insight. And then Taylor Hodge writes in, I should listen more, 5 stars. Great podcast, even if I rarely see the movies. Oh, awesome. Thanks so much. Those come from Canada. And I believe we had one from the United States as well, which was from the BLK Heel, 5 stars. This is a very good show that has insightful movie reviews. Kyle, the host, will also review TV shows and animated movies. He has fair critiques and never goes overboard with the negativity. The show has always had a good variety of guests. A good listen for work or working out. Peace. Thanks so much to everybody who left reviews for the show. I know they definitely help with the show going to other places. We broke the top 50 for the very first time this week, eventually getting to spot 34, which is absolutely incredible. To everybody who's been listening from the get-go, thank you so much. To anybody who's jumped on this train with the Film Realist at any point, has gotten off, has gotten back on. Regardless, if you're listening to this for the first time, I just wanted to say that I appreciate each and every listener. This is my opportunity to share my love and affection for film and TV, and if you appreciate my opinions on it, you're all amazing, and thanks so much for being on this journey with me. I'm not going anywhere, but I just, again, want to say thank you that anybody would consider listening to this little old show. Next week's episode has been very requested. Jermaine, I got you. Next week's episode will be a review of the Penguin miniseries, the continuation of the Batman epic crime saga. My name is Kyle Naranya, and I will see you next time.